It's going to be increasingly destructive. It's very self-indulgent. What's the point of having a party that just wants to destroy another party with nothing really
It's deeper than that, isn't it?
I think it's deeper at the moment because it's playing very heavily, understandably, on the Tories having pressed the self-destruct button by scrabbling and scrapping with each other pretty well for the last 8 years. But I think the answer to your question, here's the man. It's slightly sort of Soviet. He's appointed himself leader of his own party. He's appointed himself to the one seat he thinks the party can win without hardly any kind of process. I think your caller earlier said it's not a party. What I think he meant was it doesn't behave like a party with a structure and a broad agenda. But yes, it is going to be increasingly destructive. It's only going to do further harm.
Gina Miller, you lead a party outside the normal range of political parties. It's like your way of putting it. But you know what I mean.
Yeah.
I mean, you would die for publicity like this, wouldn't you?
No, because I actually am really worried what they're going to do to the country in this campaign. I think we were beginning to heal. I think some of the divisions are now going to be back where we were. We're going to go back to where we were 8 years ago. I mean, Brexit destroyed the Conservative Party and destroyed our country, and he's back to do it again. And, I think that's what's happened today. And I think the polls today that show the Conservatives winning, or Labour winning 194 seats, I mean, I think Farage is now going to push that even higher now by standing. I think I agreed with two things he said in his press conference today, which you might find odd. One was that there isn't going to be opposition after a Labour win because the chaos in the Tory party is just going to deepen. And the second thing he said was that he was free to change his mind. I absolutely agree that people are free to change their minds. Shame he doesn't think that about Brexit. Well, you do, but what he doesn't. When it comes to Brexit, he doesn't think people should be allowed to change their minds. But everything else, I agree with. You are allowed to change your mind. I still don't understand when he made the comment that he's going to be in politics for 5 years. So that bit I didn't quite understand today.
Well, I suppose it was just making the point he's not just going to be leader for this election and then disappear again, because everyone thought he would then go off to America and help Donald Trump.
Would you believe him? I mean, he changes his mind just as much as Sunak does.
Well, he hasn't, I mean, to be fair, he hasn't changed his mind on the big issues, has he? I mean,
I meant on standing. No, I meant about standing and not standing, going to America, offering his services to the Labour Party to sort of broker deals with Trump. That's what I meant, that sort of thing. No, he hasn't changed his mind on Brexit, and he, whatever the evidence, he doesn't seem to want to see it.
And I think by 5 years, he just probably meant he was going to serve a parliament, but who knows? And all I'd say is just one more thing, sorry, not to let the others in for a second. If he thinks...
I wouldn't intrude on private grief.
No,
that's fine.
If he thinks that he can be such an insurgent that he can somehow take over the Conservative Party in Parliament if he were elected in Clacton is so absurd. I think they'll be putting him on a sort of top of a bonfire for Guy Fawkes before they do that.
I promise to bring you two in just one second. Nice. But just to follow up on that, do you not think, though, that if the Conservatives have... let's say the Conservatives have a good week this week and they kind of win the week. And I know it sounds preposterous, but let's just imagine that for a second. And then the polls don't change. The polls don't shift at all in the Conservatives' favour. Many people believe that the Tory party would implode during the middle of an election campaign in those circumstances.
No, I think it's now stuck in a rut. I think the problem is it's going to be very difficult to move anything because unlike any election I've known in the best part of 50 years, this is one where you just feel that people made up their mind before it and aren't going to be shifted by any kind of events. And sadly, the sort of general feeling is you can do what you want, mate, but we watched you for 8 years and we've just sort of fed up with you. We don't think you behaved as Conservatives should. Please go away.
It's 14 years. People want them out.
Well, that's kind of what Alan was saying.
Yeah, I agree.
Stella.
I'm going to be really boring.
OK, Anne.
Just a cue to start my campaign.
Stella playing
safe boring. Because he is the narcissist in chief, isn't he? That's what we're seeing today, that he's gracing us with his presence. I actually think of Clacton. I know Clacton. I spent time living in Essex as a kid. It's a town that needs representation.
We used to go there on day trips to the seaside.
Exactly, Clacton Pier. It's a town that needs representation. And I just think if they actually elect him, that day-to-day thing that is so important to the British system, actually, that you have to be accountable to your constituents, that actually people will come to you about the minutiae of their lives, big and small. I don't see him as somebody who's actually going to put the work in, because this is ultimately all about him. The other thing I worry about is absolutely the Conservative Party looks from the outside. I mean, I joke about private grief, but it looks like it's in a bit of a death rattle. But one of the truisms in politics, isn't it, is things can always get worse. We've already seen in the last week a kind of bingo of things designed to appeal to reform voters. I think this is going to cement and bake in what we might call the culture wars, what I just think is incredibly divisive. I mean, last week I was coming up as a joke with kind of things that might come up next from the Conservatives, whether it was, bringing back corporal punishment and invading France and putting Boris in the House of Lords. All of that feels frighteningly true now, because if you are in that tailspin and Nigel Farage has come along to help out, which way are you going to go? And I think there's a real test of character moment for Rishi Sunak to say, actually, enough. This is not going to help people in places like Clacton. It's not going to help people in places like Walthamstow. This kind of divisive politics, this kind of celebritisation.
But it could draw the party further to the right just when it needs to go the other way.
Exactly,
that's the danger. That's really what you're saying.
That's exactly what I mean. I mean, it is going to end up in this kind of plaintive, no, we're more right-wing, more right-wing. And actually what I think the last week has shown is the public is just going, the answer to the cost of living crisis is not national service. The answer to the cost of living crisis is not actually punching down on universities. It's trying to figure out why our economy is stalling. And I'm with Gina in thinking that things like Brexit are part of that. The one thing I think is good is that I'd finally like to see Nigel Farage being held to account for the damage that he's done to this country, because he's managed to evade it every single time by not winning. So maybe if he wins, finally, he'll have to do the legwork. He'll have to be accountable to people in Clacton. And people like me in Parliament will enjoy, with relish, holding him to account for what he's done to this country.
Anne McElvoy, let's have some dispassionate political analysis. What does this actually mean for the election? Do you think that it potentially could change the result? Because I think it could. I wonder if you've...
I'm inclined that way. I'm not as heated as everybody else on this panel about Nigel Farage has got a perfect right to stand. And actually, I'd rather he stood than just threw beer bottles from the sidelines. And also, a lot of people don't see the answers. I mean, from what we've heard of a fairly narrow, albeit party mixed panel here tonight, a lot of people feel themselves to be outside that compact. This is not just about the UK and there's the Brexit word, as if that can be blamed for everything. Actually, quite a lot of things are still going out fine in the UK despite Brexit, including actually bits of the City of London are doing fine. But it's not the answer, I think, to sort of blame Brexit for everything, blame Farage for everything, when we are seeing across Europe, and remember, Iain, we're coming into European parliamentary elections this week at the weekend, I think we will see that shift of parties being challenged. The parties will often come from the right, they will often also come from the left, and that they are saying they are not happy with the compact of politics as it is being offered. So there are very good reasons to think that Farage is not the answer. Yes, he is a blowhard, but I mean, he's actually saying quite a lot of things. A lot of people agree. And there's also just a desire to say, well, this is really bad. I can't wait till he's in Parliament so I can kick him, or he won't represent his constituency well, or this has been a very irregular way of going about it, which is also true because Reform is an insurrectionist party, and of course, I mean, so is Gina's. Yeah. And in a way, I'm actually rather pleased that we have a bit of rock and roll outside the norms of politics. I don't completely see that blaming Nigel Farage for the fact that the main parties didn't really understand the country a lot in the run-up to Brexit is an acceptable way of looking at it.
So, I agree with you. I'm a Democrat as well as a socialist. I want people to stand...
I agree with Nick Clegg kind of point.
No, nobody agrees with Nick Clegg.
Go ahead, sorry.
But where I differ from you is I don't see it as about I see it about holding to account, because actually I do think about people in Clacton who have been let down. I am not here to defend the status quo. I recognise lots of politics problems. Genuinely, I'm sorry that Iain, that you weren't able to go forward, because actually I think we do need
lots
new
of different people in politics.
Yeah, I agree with Gina on that. And as a Democrat, I want well, probably they'd have got somebody better. But. No. In terms of guests, Iain, because I can disagree with you, but I can recognise you as somebody who thinks that politics ultimately should be about finding answers. My beef with Nigel Farage is his politics is fundamentally stasis. It's about find somebody to blame for why the world is unfair and use that to grift. And he and Donald Trump are in that exact same situation. They're grifters. This is if you're ever on the Donald Trump
we're saying, that it's not people
list,
who want
merchandise.
To actually, but it's not people who want to mend the country, isn't it? It's not people who want to look at everyday issues.
So what you're saying,
I can disagree with Iain, I can disagree with Alan, but I can recognise and respect they have different ideas about the way the country should move forward in a really uncertain time. How we should actually step up to what the public told us by voting for Brexit.
What you're
I don't see that with him.
Stella, is that it's a destructive move.
I think it's all about him. And actually, frankly, in politics, myself included, I'm sure there'll be many people on Twitter who would say this, we've got to move away from the idea that one person is it. That, you know, whether it is the Prime Minister, it's actually about everybody working on these problems.
If I just say one quick thing, I mean, I think there's something much bigger going on here, which is that I think we're seeing a gradual decline of the effectiveness and performance of our parliamentary democracy.
Yeah.
I think we're seeing candidates imposed with very little local participation in terms of membership or selection.
That would never happen in the Labour Party. Sorry.
We're seeing ministers being increasingly displaced by special advisors in terms of power and decision making. We're seeing the complete collapse of cabinet government, it being replaced by a much more presidential sort of prime ministerial government. And we're seeing people not performing properly in Parliament to make law. They'd rather gob off on social media.
Or present TV and radio programmes.
So, brilliantly
or
like
podcasts.
you.
We've all got a podcast.
But the thing is, the distraction is from politics, though, and policies, isn't it? That's what we want to be. People want to vote about. They want to see what are the offerings,
but
what are
it's
the
a
policy
mixture, isn't
offerings.
it? It can't just be all about policy because people would just switch off and they'd be bored. There has to be a bit of excitement
But on the
about
doorstep,
it all, and
people
he's
are asking
providing
what
it.
they stand
Where
for.
are the people of substance?
Yeah,
You
that's
see,
it.
there are
People
so
do want
few characters. You hear this all the time when you're talking to people. They say, where are the big figures in our politics now? They don't feel they're there.
But when they get them, they then start saying, "Oh, well, not that big figure." Right? We just
No, they don't.
I don't.
They say, where are the Willie Whitelaws? You know, where are the Dennis Healey's?
Well, they say if they're
I think
like,
people don't feel that anyone's
there's
there's
an
anyone
age,
who
Hang
likes
on,
that
hang on.
kind
You
of
can't all
conservative.
talk at once because nobody can understand a word you're saying. I mean, Alan, you're just being an old git when you say that there are no characters in politics now. There are. I mean, there are in all parties. Now, you might say, well, there aren't enough of them compared to the 1980s or
They're
1960s.
characters, but I'm talking about people who I think invite confidence and are substantial figures, particularly in terms of policy and running their departments. Of course, there are people who are characters because we live in a media world, so there's going to be no shortage of them. The question is, are they really people of substance when it comes to having an effective government which is actually making it work well?
It's a frightening thing that I find myself in full agreement with Alan. Very strange. Fundamentally, and you kind of said it earlier, you know, the people of Clacton should matter in this. And I just think their interests are better served by grafters rather than grifters. And what I see in Nigel Farage is a grifter. And actually what I think every community deserves is a grafter who will get into Parliament and work to make change happen so that in 5 years you've got a track record to point to, not just a great radio show or TV presentation. You know, like,
I mean, he's a
actually
big
the
figure,
substance
but what
issue
would he
is
do?
matters.
That's the thing.
Yeah.
He's a big figure.
Well,
but-
the fact is, we spent
Well, he's not gonna be
15
a
minutes
dance troupe,
talking
is he?
about him, and that is, to me, a sign.
Yeah.
And I think very likely Labour gets in, and at that point, although it's convenient, I think it's a nice phrase, that grafters and grifters, but Labour, also in the areas that I come from, like North West Durham, a lot of the North East seats, there's coastal seats, and then Clacton as you go, South Stella and a bit of the South Coast, you're going to have to kind of deal with people whose views of what's going to take them forward is not just what a kind of fairly orthodox recipe from the Labour Party. I think that will probably be good for Labour, but in a sense I would have a slightly more open ear.